que aprendemos com a natureza é que tudo pode ser usado e reutilizado de forma inteligente e nobre. E foi com essa inspiração que a JBS Couros desenvolveu um produto revolucionário, que mantém toda a beleza inconfundível do couro e leva o conceito de sustentabilidade a um novo patamar. Kind Leather, o verdadeiro couro sustentável. Uma inovação que só foi possível porque estamos sempre em busca de soluções mais sustentáveis em todos os processos de nossa empresa. O Kind Leather é o resultado de 2 anos de muita pesquisa, muitos estudos e testes com as partes de maior rendimento comercial. Por isso, o Kind Leather exige menos recursos naturais, menos produtos químicos e gera menos resíduos. E nós ainda reaproveitamos 100% das aparas geradas no processo como matéria-prima em outros segmentos. Assim como acontece na natureza, aqui nada se perde. Todo esse esforço valeu a pena. Nós temos um produto único, de alta qualidade e que atende a diversos segmentos do mercado. Ao mesmo tempo, reforçamos o nosso compromisso com a sustentabilidade, porque estamos tratando o couro com a mesma sabedoria da natureza.
The story of this family business begins on May 8th, 1821. In the late 60s, the family decides to focus on fats and tanning substances for the leather industry, an important step that still determines the course of the company. Nowadays, Smith & Zone is the largest family business in the leather sector, with sustainability and the pursuit of quality high on the agenda, their products sold in over 60 countries. Through innovation and collaboration and a strong emphasis on sustainable entrepreneurship, it is Smith & Zone's mission to create a sustainable leather value chain. As one of the top 5 players in the leather industry, Smith & Zone challenges all stakeholders in the leather value chain to become more sustainable. Because every drop makes a difference.
Uma história que começou com um desejo, o de fazer diferente de todos no mercado. Esse desejo se transformou em transparência, eficiência e confiança. Isso sem esquecer de algo primordial, ser fundamental na vida de todos os envolvidos com a empresa. Hoje, o resultado vai muito além de uma empresa embasada pela ética e pelo profissionalismo. Todos os nossos desafios começam e terminam com as pessoas. Elas são nossa origem e nosso destino. Entregamos em todo o mundo a nossa marca de acolhimento, caráter, confiança, envolvimento, empatia e união. Quando você se entrega por completo ao resultado, a sua vida e a de todos em sua volta se transformam. É parceira e extensão de todos que se relacionam, de quem faz a diferença no mundo de muitas pessoas. Euroamérica, a nossa entrega é completa.
Olá, sejam muito bem-vindos ao...
Welcome
to the CSCB Sustainability Forum 2021. Thank you for being here in this 100% online edition. This has been organized by the Brazilian Leather, the CICB, the Brazilian Tanning Center, and the Brazilian Agency to Promote Exports and Investments, APEX Brazil. Today and tomorrow, we'll have the chance to hear and get to know positive experiences in our topic, Environment in Connection. Let me thank our sponsors, JBS Coros and BN Technology, Smith & Zoom, and our silver sponsors, ATC Brazil, Buckman, Euro-America, the Union of the Tanning Industry in the state of Mato Grosso, Sinkert, and Units Brazil. I would like to thank members of CICB, those that are member of the Sustainability Certification Program, CSCB, and the companies that are members of the Brazilian Leather. I would like to remind you that this Thursday, we'll have the 24th national meeting of the ABQ TIC. It will be face-to-face and online too. You can register, just click on the link on our website, CICB. A couple of reminders. We do have simultaneous translation both in English and Portuguese. To pick the language you would like to hear, click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. If you want to submit a question, please do so using our email, contato@cicb.org.br. Your question will be submitted to speakers, and your answer will be submitted to you by email. We have 3 speakers today. We're starting off with Leonardo Limon. In the past 43 years, he developed major projects in companies such as McDonald's, Ambev, Nabisco, and Kraft Foods. Today, Leonardo is the CEO of Dreams and Purpose Consulting, and he'll be speaking about sustainable development in focus. Welcome, Leonardo. The floor is yours. Good morning. Thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. We're all connected to the environment and sustainable development. This is the topic of this conference. This is a different way of seeing things. Let me share my screen so that we can move forward. Just let me know if you can see my slides. Yes, we can see that fine. Most of the things I would like to say is that we may not pay close attention as to how much connected we are, regardless of where we are or where we may be in the future, and how much connected we are to Chinese, Afghans, people all over the world. Let me start with a video.
Diferentemente dessa luta de sumô, eu acho que
Unlike the sumo wrestling, I think most of you are familiar with it, we're faced with a struggle with ourselves. And we're fighting against time. And why are we fighting against ourselves? Because we have to understand the world we live in. The world is getting more and more complex. And we have less and less time to understand this complex world and make the right decisions to define what kind of world we would like to live in the future. We're faced with this situation. We're in the middle of a bridge, and we have come to this point of our lives, no matter where we are, and we're looking forward. And we have to make a decision. Are we going to cross the bridge to the right, using what we've learned in the past, or Are we going to move ahead looking to a different future? We have a hard time defining what we're going to do next because we're always stuck in the short term, and the decisions we have to make are more long term. We're always looking to the past, trying to find answers for the future, but those answers from the past may not be ideal for what we're about to do in the future. We may be looking in the rear view mirror and be content with what we've seen. And then we are mesmerized by what we've done. And when you look ahead, we have many uncertainties, but we have to face it. The issues we have to address in a very complex world today, they are not individual. And if we treat them so at the personal level, at the organizational level, at the state level, it doesn't matter. We won't be successful. We see, just like in these silos, when you combine them, you have more storage room when you combine them. Global solutions require global or collective solutions. No matter what the problem is, we won't reach a consensus if we do not join forces. Let me send this special invitation to you. I would like to ask you not to focus on the daily lives, on the activities we're developing. Let's focus elsewhere. We live in a fast-paced world. We cannot look ahead. However, sustainable development is not now, it's midterm, long-term. So it's key to understand in what world we're living. We live on this planet, it's planet Earth. 2/3 of it is made out of water. It's a complex enclosed system. We may be breathing a CO2 molecule produced in China or elsewhere in the world. As I said, it's a closed loop system. So you see movement of several chemicals all around this huge mass. We breathe air that was not produced where we are, and the sea connects us all. So when we connect to the environment, we're completely intertwined, and there are no two ways about it. And there's no planet B. It's 4.54 billion years. We've been on it for just 200,000 years as Homo sapiens. When we look at the planet's population, that was the population yesterday. When I checked that on their website, 7.9 billion people. We have 110,000 newborns every day. We're almost at 8 billion. The average growth rate is 110,000 a day. There are people that die on the same day, of course. In 2021, we have added up 76 million people to the world's population. It's a complex situation. It's a closed system. We keep getting more and more people on the planet. In 2021 alone, we have 76 million people more. According to the UN predictions, the world population will reach about 11 billion people by 2100, and then it will stabilize. So there's a huge stress caused by more people living on the same planet with finite resources.
Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
Esse vídeo que eu trouxe para vocês, ele retrata
This video
com o cabo canadense
reproduces the communication between Apollo 13 with Cape Canaveral when they detected a problem in the module that would take 3 astronauts to the moon. And this where that race against time starts to bring them back to Earth. And it was a successful mission thanks to the work of hundreds of scientists. The question we have to answer is, do we have a problem as a planet? We live in that VUCA world, volatile, complex, ambiguous, uncertain. This is a presentation by Professor Michael Porter that was given in Edinburgh back in 2013, and he talks about a few of the problems he believes are important.
That the world today is full of problems. We've been hearing them today and yesterday and every day for decades. Serious problems, big problems, pressing problems, poor nutrition, access to water, climate change, deforestation, lack of skills, insecurity, not enough food, not enough health care, pollution. There's problem after problem. And I think what really separates this time from any time I can remember in my brief time on Earth is the awareness of these problems. We're all very aware. Why are we having so much trouble dealing with these problems? That's the question I've been struggling with. Coming from my very different perspective, I'm not a social problem guy. I'm a guy that works with business, helps business make money. God forbid.
Sempre que eu apresento essa fração,
Every time I show this section of this TED Talk, I always ask the question, are we really aware of the problems we're going through today? I'm not trying to be pessimistic at all, but I think we should look at the data I'm about to present and reflect upon them. 3 aspects: economic, social, and environmental aspects. And I'll be giving you some data to show you and to help you find out whether we're living through a real problem. We've had important development that started out when the first industrial revolution all the way to the 5th industrial revolution. Human beings have shown an outstanding capacity to develop. And we are here maybe because of the vaccines that have been developed in record-breaking times. That means that we keep on evolving every single day. We have artificial intelligence, new technology in every area of knowledge. This is just astounding. When you look at the global GDP, we keep on increasing it. That means that our collective development is very important. There are some crises, there are some headwinds. However, the global GDP keeps on growing. When we look at the Sustainable Development Goals established by the UN in 2015, we have seen so many improvements, not in all of them. However, these improvements may not be enough to reach the goals by 2030. That's the decade of regeneration to meet the goals that were established by the Paris Agreement back in 2015. This is one of the main problems we still are faced with: income inequality. The world as a whole grows, but it does not grow at the same level in every country. 46% of all the wealth in the world, or the GDP, remains concentrated with just 1% of the population. Out of those 8 billion, just 1% owns almost half of the world's wealth. So we have a very imbalanced globe. There's another important problem, and it has to do with consumption. Of course, human beings need to consume, to eat, to live. However, with the rising number of inhabitants inside the planet, we are using more than what the Earth can regenerate on a yearly basis. In green, the green bars started out in 1970. As a world population, we consumed one Earth, and that planet would regenerate, no problem. As we move to the right, the red bars increase in size, and we are, on average, using or consuming 1.7 planets, as if we were resorting to credit that overdraft protection we have in our current accounts so that we could regenerate and replenish the world. Waste grows as our consumption grows. As the world's GDP grows, we have a linear economy system, and we generate waste. We generate 2 billion tons of solid residue on a yearly basis. This will reach 3.4 billion tons by 2050. That's a 70% increase. On the left, this is where waste is generated. Latin America is not number one. Asia and Europe are accounted or responsible for generating more waste. Food waste, that's a very interesting study by the UN. Back in 2016, the World Economic Forum commissioned a study on plastic use. 2014, we had 311 million or 1,000 tons, and by 2050, it will reach 1,000 or 1.1 million tons of plastic. Studies indicate that if we keep the pace we have today, discarding residue uncontrollably, by 2050, we have one particle of plastic that is equivalent to the amount of fish we have in the ocean. These are dramatic numbers, and I'll be referring to it later in my presentation. The trash we have in our homes, or trash that is discarded in the streets. So when it rains, that waste is taken to rivers and then oceans. We have mapped 5 major garbage patches. So this is where waste is collected. On the top right, these are items that were not generated in the ocean, of course. This is man-made, and they were not properly discarded, and they ended up in the ocean. This is a video that will shock you, just like it shocked me. This is the Ocean Cleanup Organization. It was founded in 2013 by a Dutchman, and he was 18 at the time, Boren Slat. Why did he found that organization when he was 16? He deep dived in the Greek oceans and he found plastic residue, not fish. So he founded that non-for-profit organization, and his mission is to clean 90% of floating waste in those Greek islands by 2040. That's his mission. Take a peek at how huge the ocean is and pay close attention to the video.
So Jenny is a 800-meter long floating barrier which we tow through the water. The barrier is 3 meters deep in the water. It's completely open at the bottom, which is important because it allows fish to escape. And it has flotation along the top, which helps it to keep its shape. And it's connected at each end to one of these vessels, the one that I'm standing on here and also the vessel that you can see behind me. Those vessels are moving ahead at a very slow speed. It's about 1.5 knots, which is less than 2 miles an hour. As we move through the plastic and through the water, then you get a natural flow of water caused by that movement, and the plastic is carried along those 2 barriers, which we call wings, on each side, and it's transported to a central area, and there's a collection area, which we call the retention zone, in the middle of that U shape. So all of the plastic flows along, it flows into that retention zone, and that enables us, after a certain time, maybe once a week, to bring the 2 vessels together, hand one wing of Jenny to the other vessel so they're holding both, and the other vessel can go around to the back of the system and pick up the retention zone, which has all the plastic inside. Then we take the plastic from the retention zone, empty it all out onto the deck. We separate it into different materials according to different recycling streams. We package it up and we take it back onto shore, and then we can send it for recycling.
Acredite, não é filme de terror. Imagine.
Believe me, this is not a horror movie, but imagine
A missão a que se propõe essa empresa, ou essa
the
organização,
mission this company set up.
a recolher
This is a non-for-profit organization, and they want to collect all this waste thrown into the oceans. And imagine that all that waste is being thrown right now,
vários rios que já foram mapeados no mundo inteiro.
and there are different rivers that have been mapped out across the globe, throwing hundreds of tons of waste into the ocean. And this is done by us, human beings, as mankind.
Que nós estamos
This comes from a concept that, once again, we have to rethink the linear economy, where we take natural resources from the planet, we manufacture them, we consume them, and we turn them into waste.
vamos enterrar o que já consumimos, que é totalmente
That is, we will bury what we have consumed, which is unconceivable with the number of people that we have on the planet. We have to quickly move towards a circular economy where we have the extraction of raw material
forma circular desde
at a
o desenho,
lesser degree, using it in a circular fashion
distribuição,
in our
consumo,
production, distribution, consumption, collection, recycling.
saída de resíduos o menor possível que eles possam
And there
ser
should be as little waste as possible that can be composted or recycled.
Acredito que esse próximo vídeo vai dar uma boa ideia para
The next
vocês.
video will give us an idea of the world we're living in and the world we need to live in.
The phone is worth $1,000 today and €2 of recycled materials 3 years later. We think that's economically rational. That's a good idea. And of course, if you zoom out, you see how ridiculous that is.
Está faltando a percepção das pessoas de como é que elas se tornam consumidoras.
There is a lack of perception how people can become more conscious consumers. Plastic was invented to make life easier, but we chose to use it in some businesses that don't make sense. So the straw is the biggest villain, but is the straw a problem, or how we use plastic is a problem? That system obviously is suicidal at the current scale. It's no longer sustainable. It's absolutely catastrophic.
Knowing what we know today, we have to do something. And the best news of the day, that's why I'm so enthusiastic and still an optimist, there is a solution. The solution is a circular economy, circular society.
Our society is geared toward novelty. The future is always more important than the past. Every activity geared towards the future and invention has the support, has understanding, even from the Dutch state.
The Netherlands is not a big country, and we live with a lot of people in one place. So that makes you have to mind the other people.
Circularity is about changing the soul of our economy. That's it. So it's about the attitude. It's about the attitude towards everything what makes our life possible.
A circular economy generates no waste because it is conceived from the very beginning of the product development not to have materials without value. Do you have good strawberries? Yeah, I got some. Just pick them up. Through the app, we connect those that have good food with those in need. We rethink everything related to waste. Shared economy is for you to gain time, being able to do things more efficiently, using resources more intelligently, like Airbnb. The concept of less is more. Young people no longer want to own anything, they want the experience.
I want a society, or I'm striving for a society that functions in the same way as the environment does. Waste does not exist.
We are not going to captivate people using a moralistic discourse of morality that doesn't seduce anybody. Changes will be viral. They will not come from government decrees. Another important point, since we started talking about food, there is an incredible challenge and highly complex that we face as a society. First, global hunger. Today, 690 million people do not know whether or not they will have food to eat. And on the other side, as a global society, we lose 1.3 billion tons of food a year. That volume of food that we throw to waste from the field to the fork would be able to feed twice the people that starve on a daily basis. Another complex situation is that this food waste will go to landfills or is exposed, like we see on the picture, is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, standing only third to China and the US. Is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. With the coronavirus, hunger became an even bigger problem in Brazil and elsewhere. The UN estimates that more than 690 million will suffer from hunger. So that we understand those 690 million people that starve. I did the math. I took the Barcelona stadium with a capacity of 85,000 supporters and noticed that those that starve will be able to fill 8,117 Barcelona stadiums today. Here I bring you this speech by Antonio Guterres, Secretary General, who speaks about hunger and ethics.
Food loss and waste is an ethical outrage. In a world with enough food to feed all people everywhere, 690 million people continue to go hungry, and 3 billion cannot afford a healthy diet. Food loss and waste also squanders natural resources, water, soil, and energy, not to mention human labor and time. It worsens climate change, given the significant role of agriculture in generating greenhouse gas emissions. International concern is reflected in Sustainable Development Goal 2, which enshrines a commitment to achieving zero hunger, and in SDG 12, which calls on us to halve food waste and reduce food loss by 2030. While many countries are taking action, we need to step up efforts. The COVID-19 pandemic has underlined the fragility of our food systems and worsened food loss and waste in many countries. We need new approaches and solutions. The inaugural observance of the International Day of Awareness of Food Loss and Waste comes as we prepare for the 2021 Food Systems Summit. I urge countries to set a reduction target aligned with SDG 12, measure their food loss and waste, and act boldly to reduce it. Policy action in this area should also be included in climate plans under the Paris Agreement. Many businesses should take a similar approach. Individuals can shop carefully, store food correctly, and make good use of leftovers. Let us work together to reduce food loss and waste for the benefit of people and our
A informação de vocês, dos maiores
So that you understand,
de perdas de comida
one of the greatest waste of food happens at home.
econômica, vamos dar uma olhada
Moving
na
from the economic scenario, let us take a look at social elements. What has been happening in the social arena? And I'm sure there are many women attending this session today.
mundo inteiro não tem
Women across the globe do not have the same chances as men. So in every country, women are faced with discrimination and inequality. They are faced with violence, abuse, unequal treatment at home and at work, and they are denied opportunities to learn, lead, and make money. One of the biggest social problems we have in the world has to do with gender and opportunity differences. 24% of women become a parliament member in their countries. 24% receive on average or earn less than men. 2/3 of 781 million illiterate people in the world are women. 153 countries still have laws that economically discriminate against women, and across the globe, 1 out of every 3 women will suffer violence or abuse during their lifetime. One of the biggest wounds we have in our society, discrimination against women. Another very important point in the social arena has to do with racism. Perhaps white people like myself, and I must admit that this topic was not on my radar screen, but it became so daily. We have to look at this situation again. We have to work so that we can promote racial equality, irrespective of our skin color, where we were born or where we live. There is no reason why we should have discrimination. These topics are so important that they gain companies. Like, you might have seen this scene during the Grand Prix. All drivers support the end of racism. In Brazil, I wanted to give you something highly positive. If you do not know, it's worthwhile learning about it. The Mover movement, 143 companies making a difference, proposing a different future where achievements are equally possible. It is a movement to promote racial equality. It purports to be an effective tool to fight racism, generating opportunities for the Black people in Brazil. 3 major objectives: to generate 10,000 positions of leadership among Black people by 2030, to employ and train through opportunities that will balance visibility of Black professionals, and to make the population aware about the topic. Another very important topic today are the refugees. A refugee is someone forced to leave their country due to persecution or generalized violence due to religion, race, ethnicity, political or convictions. The number is impressive. What is the global context? More than 1% of mankind
se deslocando de país a outro
is moving from one country to another because they can no longer live in their country of origin. Imagine if we had to leave our homes without taking absolutely anything, beginning a pilgrimage in the search for another country where we could live and have a decent life. There are 82.4 million people that are forced to leave their homes, and that number is growing year after year. This number is estimated to grow to 1.2 billion refugees in 30 years, most of it due to the climate change that we will experience. Countries that have the largest number of refugees, Syria, Venezuela, in our continent, where we have many Venezuelans, thousands of them coming to Brazil, Afghans, South Sudan, and Myanmar. And we have to see situations like this, people trying to flee Afghanistan. I'm sure you have seen these terrifying scenes from Afghanistan. Moving on to the third scope I'd like to discuss with you, the environmental scope. How are we doing? Global warming is a fact, one of the most talked about topics today. I bring you here a summary. This is the cover of the latest climate report, where scientists are observing changes in every region, in every climate system, according to this report. The latest IPCC report put out in August. Many of the changes in climate are unprecedented in hundreds or dozens of thousands of years. The continuous increase in sea level, that's something irreversible. If you do not know, this is a NASA website measuring sea level through satellites. They constantly measure ocean levels, making estimates about temperature increase. I took a city, Cananéia, in the state of Sao Paulo. You can see that this curve on the graph is the increase in sea level, and you will get to that sidewalk where you can see somebody walking. That's the estimate, should nothing be done. Global temperature is on the rise. You can see on the graph on the left, even measured by different institutes, the curves follow the same trend. Temperature increase ever since it started being measured in a pre-industrial era at around 1800, and the estimate on the right is that temperature will keep on increasing should we not take any major activity. Increased levels of CO2 levels. On the left, we had a small reduction due to COVID, but we are coming back to the pre-pandemic levels. And on the right, we see emissions by country, CO2 generation. When we look at China, China as the greatest generator of CO2. Why is that so? Is this because what China produces and uses remains in China, or is it being exported to other countries? How many Chinese products do we have at home? So how much CO2 did China generate as compared to the products that we are buying? Estimates for global warming, unfortunately, are not good. If everything remains as so, in January 2034, the temperature will have increased 1.5 degrees C, and many scientists are saying that many systems will not be able to regenerate. We've never generated so much CO2 as today. 278 ppms on the atmosphere has never been observed in the pre-industrial area. Today, 417 ppms. We almost doubled that value. So there is a rush. Countries want to neutralize their CO2 emissions. On this map, we see different colors. The color in Brazil is for 2060. It would be unacceptable due to different reasons if we do not accelerate our pace according to scientists. We won't have a good outcome. Another important point that might not be on our radar screen has to do with water. On the map, we identify where we will have water stress or shortage of water by 2040. Brazil still appears without being a major concern, but we know that water distribution in Brazil is quite irregular. A lot of water in the north, in the southeast and south, in industrialized areas where we have the highest concentration of our population, we do not have enough water. So water stress is a concern. Some numbers related to water in the world. 2 billion people do not have drinking water. 3.6 billion people in the world have no sanitation at home, and 494 million people defecate in open air. Alarming figures. What are we doing with water? If you live in Sao Paulo, you might know it. Even those who do not live in Sao Paulo might be familiar with a road called Marginal. The Tietê River has its source in the city of Salesópolis. So this is the water source of the Tietê River. I live in Santana do Parnaíba. In this municipality, this is the look of the same river, totally polluted. So we are receiving a planet with clean water and we are dirtying it. The water crisis is a fact. It is attenuated now by the rains, but our reservoirs have less water, and that has an impact on electric power. And the lack of sanitation is impressive across the globe. This is a picture from 2017. It's true in many countries. Let us watch a video that might pose a very intriguing question. Introducing, what planet do we want to live in? We received a planet with clear water sources. Are we using well this gift from nature? We still have time to revert this situation.
Seguimos. E aqui temos algumas notícias de última hora e muito
Here we have latest news.
notícias, né?
We have to pay attention to the news. We know that we do have fake news. This is an area you all know about. I'm very happy to see the advances in this area as presented before my presentation. Clearly, conscious industries working to promote the sustainability of such an important sector in the global scenario. I wanted to show you some changes that have been happening in this sector. We know that many technology companies have joined this sector, promoting disruption, bringing products that are similar to animal protein, but using vegetable protein. This is a new world we're living in. New companies start every day with plant-based products. In Brazil, the Seara line, JBS announcing the acquisition of biotech foods, and Bill Gates, that we all know for his relevance in the technology world, saying that developed nations should only use or should only eat plant-based proteins. So there is a lot of discussion, but that will take many years. But all this production today should be done sustainably, as we saw and as we see in many areas across the globe, and especially in Brazil. In agriculture, we are seeing a true revolution in the way things are planted. This is traditional planting style that is affected by climate change. And we see indoor farms with minimum use of fertilizers, very little use of chemicals. You will know exactly the yield you will get. Gigantic plants. This is a plant in Kentucky in the US. But something we can't forget, that most products we consume come from small farmers, and they must remain afloat because this agriculture has to be more productive, more efficient, because it employs so many people. Most of the food we consume comes from small farmers. We have to keep an eye on durable packages because they might represent danger to the environment. So they must follow the cycle of a circular economy. And we will increasingly see packages with the different information that we had in the past. So the carbon footprint of the product. So the food industry will be invited to show its figures, especially in terms of climate change. Climate change is the agenda of the young people. We will see demonstrations across the globe. This is a young girl that became famous, Greta Thunberg from Sweden. She's 16 today. She went to the parliament saying that I don't want you to give me hope. I want you to panic and act as if your house was on fire. That's what we need in our energy mix. The younger generations are more connected with sustainability. They are looking for brands that will lead the way, brands that create with them, not only for them. Young people will have an important clout in the world changes. We already have strategic changes between two administrations in the US. We had the leaders summit on climate, many countries committed to the reduction of emissions. And recently we had COP26 in Glasgow, where 4 items were discussed: mitigation, adaptation, funding for developing countries, and global collaboration to reduce emissions and to reduce global warming. We are finally, after this COP, we will leave the era of fossil fuel, perhaps not at the necessary speed, but there are many agreements being made, and we should move on to the era of renewable energy. The financial market has an eye on it. The financial market always focus on the short term. This is Wall Street, and all listed companies have to present their results every quarter. And it's difficult when you have to look at medium and long term. There is a lot of pressure. Now the financial market is looking at companies differently, and all of us have heard the three letters ESG. When we look at what they mean, involving all stakeholders, not only shareholders. So what is being preached by ESG? You're going to see right after my presentation. On the environmental side, climate change and the reduction of emissions, the rational use of water, the preservation of biodiversity, increased energy efficiency, reforestation, waste management, and circular economy. On the social area, customer satisfaction, gender and diversity equality, support to vulnerable social groups, health and safety, contribution to community, human rights, and training. On the governance side, a corporate governance system, observing the whole, not only the company, compensation, reducing the compensation level between the lowest and the highest hierarchical level, cybersecurity, the hacking of confidential information, responsible supply chain, and compliance systems. Companies should be audited, and obviously, this generated an avalanche of implementation of ESG systems. Many companies do not know where to go, but they are going.
Unfortunately, this is yet another source of concern. This is the new variant, Omicron. Just like I said before, inequality comes to the surface again. It comes from Africa, and of course, Africa has fewer and fewer vaccinated people. Vaccines are not as available there. Again, Professor Michael Porter, a message to private organizations. I believe that the private sector plays a key role in solving world problems.
To impact and address these social problems. And this opportunity is the largest business opportunity we see in business. And the question is, how can we get business thinking to adapt this issue of shared value? This is what I call shared value. Addressing a social issue with a business model. That's shared value. Shared value is capitalism, but it's a higher kind of capitalism. It's capitalism as it was ultimately meant to be, meeting important needs, not incrementally competing for trivial differences in product attributes and market share. Shared value is when we can create social value and economic value simultaneously. It's finding those opportunities that will unleash the greatest possibility we have to actually address.
Most of us agree with what he said. Private companies have that capacity, and they can address several of the problems we have. Finally, I would like to ask you to reflect upon a couple of things. In every crisis, there's an opportunity. I always like to learn from crises and look at the future positively. It's up to us to address the problem we created ourselves based on what we want in the future. What is no longer as important today? Be it an apple or a product, it can be copied, replicated, produced differently. You may give consumers something similar. However, we're living in the times of the how. how you make a product, how you deliver a service based on all the previous premises. ESG, the 2030 agenda, having a product or a service or something is no longer enough. Consumers will look into how you're going to be making that product. What are you doing in order to produce their product? Is it correct? Is it ethical? Is it acceptable? So we have to look at the how more and more. It's not going to be easy to remain unnoticed. No matter how big you are, someone will be looking at you. There's no point in trying to hide from these global issues. You may make a decision, you can make a decision to be a leader or to be a follower. As a leader, you can determine your future. You don't have to follow something that you may not agree. We have to be reminded that despite organizations, we ourselves, myself, Leonardo Lima, yourself as individuals, have to make the decision for change. If you do not make that decision, nothing will happen. We all have to be aware of where we are and the role we play on this planet. We may influence more and more people through social media. Unfortunately, they are not properly used, but when they are used properly, you can generate very interesting positive influences. We have to be reminded that everything reflects upon the business goodwill. Businesses are more and more being evaluated by tangible and intangible numbers. We have seen time and time again companies being destroyed, not by their tangible numbers, rather by their intangible assets, their reputation, in other words. It's a race that has already started, and we can make a decision. Are we going to keep on looking into the past and believing it's all right? And are we going to walk into the future despite challenges, uncertainties, things we don't know? That's a constant. And we have to answer the question, what planet would we like to visit in the future? Being an optimistic myself, I would like to end my presentation with a video that provides us with positive insights and gives us a lot of responsibility, of course.
Suddenly, saving our planet is within reach. We've worked out all the problems. We're working on all the solutions. Most of them we can do now, and over time, all of them help the economy. Our population growth is actually slowing down, and by the end of this century, it will plateau. There's never been a better opportunity to take control. The plan is obvious. Stop doing the damaging stuff. Roll out the new green tech and systems as they arrive. Stabilize the human population as low as we fairly can. Keep hold of the natural wealth we have currently got, and in 80 years' time, we'll be past the worst of it. More than that, we'll have built a world with eternal energy, clean air and water, a stable, healthy world that we can benefit from forever. So what's stopping us? This opportunity is out of sight. Each of us is blinkered by the demands of here and now. Big picture, long term, they're not in our field of vision. That must change if we're going to change. We now have the choice to create a planet that we can all be proud of, our planet. The perfect home for ourselves and the rest of life on Earth. We have a plan. We know what to do. There is a path to sustainability. If enough people can see the path, we may just start down it in time.
Chegamos na mesma ponte e
We're back to the same bridge, and we have to make that decision. Where are we going? Through alliances is the only way out to address this complex problem. Thank you. It was a pleasure to be with you today. I hope you can reflect upon the problems of the world we're living. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Leonardo, for being with us today. Your purpose to inspire and engage people has a lot to do with Brazilian leather is looking for. Congratulations on you, the work you've done, and I hope to see you soon. This is a live broadcast. We have our next speaker, David Bom Tempo. He is the Executive Environment and Sustainability Manager of the CNI, the Brazilian Industry Association. He has a master's degree in economy, and he will be discussing a very important topic, ESG, environmental, social, and governance practices.
Bom, acredito que todos já estão vendo aqui a apresentação.
I believe you can all see my slides. First off, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It's a pleasure to talk about the environmental and sustainability agenda of CNI, the Brazilian Industrial Confederation. We have been investing in this sustainability agenda. Let me start by talking about the importance of industry to our country. Industry is a relevant pillar towards that transition to a more sustainable economy. Our contribution is 1.3 trillion reals, 20.4% of the Brazilian GDP. Almost 30% is devoted to the welfare, almost 70% of R&D, and almost 70% of Brazilian exports. Almost 10 million jobs are created within this industry. I always like to start my presentations showing how representative we are. We represent almost 27 industry federations, almost 1,300 unions, and over 476,000 companies represented by our institution. This shows how present we are throughout the country and in many different sectors of our economy. Natural resources and the environment have always been part of CNI, just as investment, education, efficiency on the part of the government, all these key elements always contributing to competitiveness and, of course, taking into account sustainability. Again, natural resources and sustainability have always been part and parcel of our agenda. We have been working hard, both at COP26 and the Expo Dubai. We have shown how industries can contribute to that transition to a low-carbon economy. We showed a few cases and our strategy based on four main pillars. We talked about energy and transmission. We talked about the carbon market and also forest preservation and also circular economy, along the lines of what Leonardo Lima has just showed us. Here are some aspects directed to the international forum. These are some trade agreements and their impacts, some guidelines. Brazil is about to join the OECD. 40% of economic instruments have to do with sustainability. That's how important it is to develop public environmental policies, to join them to economic instruments. We have that agreement between Mercosur and European Union, an entire chapter on economic and sustainable development, and the Paris Agreement is a core pillar to develop this roadmap, always aiming at reaching the goals of the Brazilian national goals. The European Green Deal, always trying to reduce emissions and the environmental impact, and also reducing the loss of biodiversity. Very important topics that have been discussed in the COP26 and also in COP15 that will take place in China. That's the biodiversity COP. Circular economy is prevalent across the board, always trying to establish that connection to the sustainable development goals. More and more companies and countries are joining in, trying to reach that sustainable economy. The economic recovery in the post-pandemic world, always trying to focus on more sustainable investments. These are some global trends. CNI is part of several international fora, B20, BIAC, BISMAF, and other programs also included in the OECD framework. This is how that issue has been discussed in these many areas. These are the top guidelines for countries. We have come to realize that countries and companies as well are joining that net zero emissions or carbon emissions by 2050. That was even before COP26. So countries and companies are looking for expanding their green energy matrix. Hydroelectric power plant accounts for over 80% of our energy matrix. These are new solutions, more technological in nature, green hydrogen or wind and offshore wind energy. There are areas in our country, just like North and Northeastern Brazil, especially in the states of Rio Grande do Norte and Ceará. These are strategic regions that can produce this fuel of the future, as it's called. Brazil can become a major player in that green agenda. We have come to see, to realize that CO2 has become a global commodity, especially when we talk about the carbon market and how we establish that those transactions amongst countries, especially after the approval of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Electrical vehicles, another important issue. It has to do with the knowledge we have of biofuels, the Renova Bio. We talked about the end of subsidies to fossil fuels in COP26, but on the other hand, more incentives to renewable sources, investment banks, central banks, and funds directing their investments to projects and to countries and companies that take ESG into account. The carbon pricing system has been implemented in several countries. We conducted a study comparing 5 major markets to help us understand from mistakes that were made so that we could adapt to our country to try to implement a domestic carbon market. We have compared to mature markets in Europe, California, and Canada, and even Mexico, countries that are more similar to Brazil. Smaller markets such as the metropolitan area of Tokyo, markets that already regulate most of their economies, such as South Korea. So we have been discussing, we have been debating with the European Union, with the border carbon tariff. And we all, of course, try to pick and choose the best solutions to adapt them to our country. This is an important table, putting a very economic spin to the issue. The World Economic Forum pointing to major risks in 2021, and of course, taking into account the previous editions, the environmental, social, and governance issues that have always been present throughout, especially when we talk about world risks. These are some of our competitive advantages. If we can explore them properly, we can benefit from that potential. As I said, we have a clean and relevant matrix. 85% of our energy comes from renewable sources, low carbon footprint. The second biofuel production, second to the US only. The largest biodiversity, 15% in the Amazon region alone. Very specific characteristics, almost 60% of forest coverage, and the highest water availability in the world. Just like Leonardo said, these reserves are not evenly distributed throughout their country. So major areas that demand those resources because of the economic activity or the number of people, these areas have had problems regularly, especially southeastern and southern Brazil. And of course, northeastern Brazil as well. Okay, on to our agenda. The global impact, or the global pact rather, that's the report that discusses ESG. My intention is to use all factors, the environmental, social, and governance, to measure companies to find out how well they're doing as far as sustainability goes, to help us make better decisions as to where we're going to invest. This has become even more relevant when we talk about financing, but we still have to discuss many parameters. What is an ESG company per se? What steps would they have to go through before a company is considered ESG prone to receive that type of investment? Banks, funds, and other credit agencies use their own benchmarks. In that global pact, we're discussing how we can standardize that measurement so that we can have a more standard definition of ESG. What would fit within each one of these boxes? At the CNI, we discussed the environmental agenda, especially when we talk about efficient use of natural resources. We talk about the energy efficiency, not only expanding renewable sources, but also investing in energy efficiency, cheaper energy, but bringing green hydrogen and, of course, offshore wind energy. Circular economy is very important. Waste, again, eco-design, and of course, taking into account bioeconomy. It has to do with biodiversity, mitigation of pollution, animal welfare, and also using that benchmark as far as water resources, especially water security, when we talk about water resources and also sanitation. Social, workers' right, health and safety, community engagement, relations with stakeholders, diversity, and education, a key component to help our populations so that we can have more sustainable goals. Governance, again, very important, transparency, compliance, accountability. This company or companies should take into account all these elements. This is a very important timeline. I'm not going to discuss every single item on your screen, but ESG is something that has been present time and time again. Not as a concept as we have today, but we've always considered sustainability, starting with the Earth Summit back in 1992 in Rio. And then investment funds and banks have played a more relevant role as of 2016. And we've seen what happened to funds that have been directing their investments to companies and projects that take ESG into account. This is a very important chart. We use that to discuss climate issues. This is what we see. International capital flows, about 500 billion of resources that can be directed to projects, countries, and companies that take the climate issue to heart. Maybe just a small portion, 4.5%, is directed to the Latin America and the Caribbean. Brazil accounts for a smaller fraction. But we have to understand, why is it that we get so little resources? Those resources are directed to the US, Asia, and Europe. We have to understand, why do we receive, or understand why we receive so little resources. There are some barriers, such as warranties. Again, a comparative study of indices. Companies that are considered sustainable provide better yields, 220% in terms of yields, especially when we talk about MCI, ACWI, and the global 100 companies receive about 260%. These are some BlackRock, the largest investment funds, $7 trillion worth of assets they've announced that will locate their investments in sustainable companies. Several players following suit, expanding their resources focused on sustainable companies. Again, another comparison in terms of volume, back in 2016, we had 22 trillion. In 2018, that went up to 30. And we're going to keep on that trend, especially when you take into account the agendas that are being discussed throughout the world. Domestically, we can see that our potential is relevant, despite receiving less volumes or resources in that sense. We have to become a more significant player in that arena. Here are some ESG opportunities we've identified at the CNI. Consumers are looking for more sustainable consumption patterns. We've seen that in our circular economy agenda that can be reflected upon public or sustainable public accounts. It's very important when we talk about OECD, the power of the state to help make that transition. How can we make that transition in terms of public purchases and how we can help in that sense?
Also, financial profitability, long-term return, cash flow generation for transparent businesses, improved business image, especially reputation, risk mitigation, and the strengthening of the country image with an agenda that has been intensified since 2019. CNI's contribution to the ESG agenda, I don't know if you're familiar with CNI's role in the national context. We are a company working to influence public policies. We have no production. We technically define the best positions, and we work along with decision makers for those public policies to pave the way for companies to define their projects, for them to work with more legal certainty in a better business environment that can meet the requirements of the new agendas like ESG, but trying to work in line with the SDGs for 2030. This is what was done in terms of the environment. For the transition towards a low carbon economy, we worked a lot on climate financing. We ranked 16 major funds that individuals and companies would have access to, showing the step-by-step procedure, because this is an alternative we have to access those resources and implement projects. We work a lot on the technical side to register emissions. We are still working on that agenda because it's a very relevant agenda in the carbon market, the record of emissions. We have also worked on Article 6 that was approved during the latest COP with a vision from the industry so that we can advance with the regulation of the global carbon market, the circular economy. An old agenda at CNI, we brought that agenda in 2014, where we tried to understand what circular economy meant. We worked along with the academy, and today we work to develop an international standard leading the industrial sector in Brazil, making contributions to this international discussion, whose objective is to create an international standard for a circular economy at the ISO level. As I said, we recently published a booklet on sustainable public procurement. We wanted to produce technical records for different sectors to work with the federal government so that we can promote a collaboration between the public and the private sector to have a sustainable development. This is the agenda for solid waste, a very relevant topic that we implemented in this period. Energy recovery, one of the alternatives that we can give to waste. What cannot be recycled can generate energy. This is an agenda in line with what was defined by COP26, the reduction of methane emissions in our climate agenda. We also work on incentives to recycling. What we have in Brazil today is that it is expensive to work recycled products. It's a lot cheaper to use fresh raw material, and we should increasingly use recycled product. Bioeconomy and biodiversity. We ratified the Nagoya Protocol. So in the next COP that will discuss access and benefit sharing, Brazil will have more bargaining power. So the idea is to remunerate the country for having the largest biodiversity in the world, playing a very important role in benefit, access and sharing, and bioeconomy, especially for public policies, innovation technology, and a common topic, which is financing. In terms of forests, the importance of the sustainable production of native forests, forest concessions as a way to reduce illegal deforestation. We also conducted the Amazon Plus 21 forum that gave rise to an institute that was recently launched, also called Institute Amazon 21 or Plus 21. The idea is for that institute to work as a bridge between the financiers and those that will implement the projects in the 9 states of the legal Amazon region. That's already underway. We have 2 major projects, one on biogas and the other one related to crop, livestock, forest integration. But the idea is to add more and more projects that may change the situation in the legal Amazon region. Water security, working on water reuse. We showed that the industry is part of the solution and the industry can contribute to the water problem. On the social side and education, today we have a very defined focus. We work on elementary education, on trade education, business education, but also in education related to innovation management. We have very important figures. This sector has become an important player for industrial education. Without forgetting culture, some awards for the national industry and also the promotion of the Acesse program for teachers and artists. Some data on the labor market, workers' health and safety. 3.7 million people benefited in terms of health and safety. Some norms that we constantly review to reduce bureaucracy and to promote a better work environment. The facilitation of collective negotiations at the level of the ILT rather, International Labor Organization. And a very relevant agenda that we believe in the next few years will gain momentum, which is basic sanitation. The first phase was concluded, the approval of the legal framework at the Congress, and we are now working on the regulations so that we can bring more investments and change the sanitation indicators. Today, Brazil has to invest a lot in sanitation that will impact not only the environment, but also health, real estate prices, among other elements. And lastly, governance, a very important agenda to CNI. Recapping, we work a lot supporting the approval of the legal security law, the agendas that are important for the industry that can deal with issues related to transparency and the representation of the private sector. We also want to perfect the agenda for public commitment. The whole civil society should know what decision makers are doing, integrity and fight against corruption. We worked along with the federal government, the support of institutions to prevent corruption, working on the ex ante and the regulation of lobbying, recognizing this activity as a professional occupation. This is an agenda quite advanced in different countries in the world. We want to promote the transparency, compliance, and accountability. This concludes my presentation. All this agenda that I covered is available on this website. This is a channel we created in order to transparently and objectively provide the key messages on the different topics for environment and sustainability. You will find topics on forest, biodiversity, circular economy, bioeconomy, among others. So basically, you will see our position about all those topics. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'd be glad to answer questions if you have any. You have here my contact information. Thank you very much. Thank you, Davi. Excellent content. The leather industry is paying careful attention to the ESG concept, and it couldn't be left outside this forum. Thank you very much for your time in bringing more information about the topic. The next presentation will be in English. You can switch your audio to simultaneous interpretation using the interpretation button. Researcher Dr. Michael Meyer from Phil Fiber Institute in Germany will present a study that impacted the materials sector. It's a study, leather and synthetic materials. Let us see the findings of that study.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this talk of this wonderful workshop from CSCB Sustainability Forum. I would like to talk today about leather and its synthetic substitutes, and we did a comparison of these animal-based materials and the vegan alternatives in the last month. So I would like to present today a couple of these results and a discussion about this. Why we are able to do this? We at Filk in Germany have been for a long time only a tanning institute, over 130 years, but 70 years ago we began as well to manufacture and to develop alternatives to leather. That means coated textiles, so to put polymer films on top of textile substrates. The word for this is also found artificial leather, and we did this last 70 years. So today we are focusing on polymer coatings and modifications, and as well also biomaterials. We employ material experts, scientists, engineers, and technologists. Let's talk about leather. The principal structure of leather is the skin, which is stabilized by tanning, a tanning procedure. And the principle of a leather structure is similar to the skin structure. So what we find if we have a cross-section of a leather is the skin structure. And this skin structure is composed of collagen fibers. In the top of the material here, it's more tightly bound. And in the bottom, it's more loosely and more coarse fibers which we can find. And on top we have a grain layer which is composed of very thin collagen fibers. We have also some hair channels on top, which we can see here. And these hair channels and the ordering of these hair channels on top of the surface reflects the appearance of the skin, and we can decide between different skins regarding these hair channels. If we now compare the skin with another material, we can see that firstly the skin has also a biological function. So the skin itself is responsible for temperature regulation, humidity regulation, protection against mechanical injury, gradient, or the protection against dust, dirt, UV irradiation, infections, and also the elastic coatings of the joints here. And we can see that the structure of the skin is responsible for every of these different properties. For example, the protein itself determines the temperature regulation and the humidity regulation regarding the water vapor which is going through the skin and which is diffusing through the skin. We have the fibrous gradient, which is coming from the top or going from the top to the bottom, and where we have these properties as protection against mechanical injury and so on. Furthermore, the skin is support structure as well for a couple of different further parts of the skin, for example, hair, nail, hooves, and horns. If we now compare such a skin material or leather with a coated textile, which is an alternative material based on fossil raw materials, we can see that such a coated textile or artificial leather is composed of a textile support in the bottom, a polymer foam, a polymer film, which is very compact, and a synthetic coating on the top. The synthetic coating differs usually from the polymer film, and it's responsible or causes the abrasion properties, the UV stability, fastness, and so on. Further materials which are coming on the market are, for example, fungi materials composed completely on vegan alternatives. So grown tissues coming from fungi, and they are completely different to the both materials which I have described before. For example, these fungi looks like this. They are fibrous structures which are very homogeneous over the whole cross-section, and they are composed of a couple of different hyphae which are the basic structure of the fungi. Then we have other materials, for example, cork material. Cork is also a material which is coming from the wood or the oak tree, and the cork oak tree, and the cork oak tree is composed or is surrounded from the bark, and part of the bark is the cork. Cork is an organic foam which is looking like a fossil foam but composed completely of organic material coming from the nature. The materials which are composed of these cork materials or cork parts is composed of the cork material on top and of a substrate which is glued on a textile, and this textile is composed or combined with this cork material on top. Both of these materials, the cork material as well as the fungi material, is a mixture of different polysaccharides, the cell walls of the plant, low molecular weight metabolic products, so a combination of different components. If we now compare these three graphs I've shown to you with the original cross-sections which we can find in the microscopy, we can find exactly the leather structure which I have described with this tight structure in the bottom, in the top, and the more loose structure in the bottom. We can find this in the microscopic picture. You can see here the tight structure and here the coarse fibers. In case of coated textiles, we can find exactly the compact film on top, then the foam, and then the textile support. Here we can see the compact film, the foam, and the textile support at the bottom. And the homogeneous structure of the fungi material, which is composed mainly of the hyphae. If we now develop a material and we look and test on materials which are coming on the market, we have to focus on a couple of different aspects and properties which are necessary to have to be successful on the market with different materials. For example, we have the usability, which is directly connected to the aging behavior. We have as well the comfort, which is responsible especially for seats or for upholstery material. And regarding the manufacturing of different articles, we have the processability. Three aspects which are very important if we get material and we come on the market with this. To test these three different aspects, we have a couple of different methods which are summarized here just shortly, but I would like to focus on three different methods which describe these different aspects in a principal way. The usability and the aging can be described with the flexometer test. The comfort is directly connected to the water vapor permeability and the water vapor absorption. And the processability is directly connected or reflects the tensile strength and the tear resistance. If we now just have a look on this short clip where we can see how the tensile test is working, you can see that two clamps are pulling on the material, and we can see that the material is lengthened and strengthened, and the material at the end is destroyed by this machine, and we measure the force of the clamps which is needed to pull the material to broaden the material. The principle is shown here, and we can see if we pull the material, we can see that the material becomes longer and at the end it is destroyed. In this case, we can see that the leather material is just lengthened and the fibers are oriented in the direction of the pulling. In case of coated textile, the textile orients itself if it's possible, but in some cases the textile is directly destroyed. And in case of the fungi material, if you draw in this direction, as we have seen here, this direction and the other direction, we can see that the fungi material is directly destroyed. So the stability we expect is very low in the fungi material, and it's a bit higher in the coated textile, and it's very high in the leather material. A further test which we do is the flexometer test we can see here. So it is directly reflecting the stability of the material and especially also the usability, so the appearance of the coating after we have loaded it with a couple of these flexes, a number of these flexes. And then we visually test the surface and look whether we get cracks or small destructions of the surface. And the last test we do is the water vapor permeability. We have again the three materials, and we expect that these blue bubbles, which reflect the water vapor molecules, are diffusing very easily through this open structured material. It is a bit more complicated in the case of leather, where we have a diffusion, a very fast diffusion through this fibrous structure. Then it becomes more tightly, and at the end, through this tight top layer, it becomes very slow, the diffusion. In case of the coated textile, we expect that diffusion is very slow, especially in the case if we have this compact polymer film on top. So let's have a look, and we can see that the molecules are going through this material, and in case of fungi material, it works very fast. In case of leather, it is slowed down in the top, and in case of the coated textile, the molecules are stopped in the foam layer and they cannot diffuse through the compact layer on top. So let's have a look on the different structures again, and also on a couple of different materials which came on the market in the last 1-2 years, which we can compare regarding their structure. We have again on top the leather, in this case a shoe upper leather, and a coated textile, in this case PUR coated. Then we have a couple of different materials which are called, for example, Deserto or Vegea or apple skin. And we see the same structure as we can find it for the PUR coated textile. So the principle of the structure is the same. It is also the same, we find also the same components, means PUR, on top of a textile. And in this case of Deserto, Vegea and apple skin, only some fillers are added. For example, in case of Deserto, cactus fibers, Vegea, cellulosic fibers, and apple skin, some parts of the apple, which are composed with the polyurethane and then coated on top of the textile support. In case of teak leaf, we can find as well a support, and then we find that teak leaf is glued on top, and on the final top, the last layer really on top, is a wax film which is necessary to get high usability. And in case of muskin and a different material, kombucha, we can find in case of muskin it is open structure, and in kombucha it's a fungi which is used from manufacturing beverages, and this is a compact film composed of glued polysaccharide. In case of snap, pep, and Pinatex, we find also different structures, but they are not composed as we can find it here. They are composed of different cellulosic fibers, which are glued together with a synthetic binder. And in case of cork-coated textile I was talking about, we find the cork foam on top, glued on a textile support. And in case of wood-coated textile, a very specific thing, I would show the surface later on, we can find a layer of wood which is coated on top of a textile structure. If we now look on the surfaces, we find that leather reflects the structure of the different hair channels, or the holes from the hair channels. This is copied in the case of the PUR coated textile, so we have embossed a structure which looks similar to leather. In case of Deserto, Vegea, and apple skin, which are very similar in their structure to the coated textile, we find again the same structure or a similar structure. And in case of teak leaf, it is optically optimized in regard to the structure, so we can find the teak leaf structure on top, but it's coated of a final synthetic coating. Muskin looks in cross-section similar to the surface, so it's a very fine fibrous structure which appears very nice, and in case of kombucha it's more indifferent. In case of snap, pep, and Pinatex, we can find the structures or the fibers which are glued together. And in case of cork, we find on top the cork structure, and in case of wood, we can see that it has been a wood covering which is destroyed or which is cut by a laser beam. So we find these squares here, and the structure of the wood is destroyed because to get flexibility of the material. If we now compare these these 5 different parameters I was talking about, firstly, the water vapor absorption, WVA, the water vapor permeability, WVP, and as well the flex resistance, the tear resistance, and the tensile strength. We find in case of the shoe upper leather very high values for the flex resistance and the mechanical parameters, and it shows a good water vapor permeability and a good water vapor absorption. In case of PUR coated textile, which we have seen before, we can see that the flex resistance is very high, but the mechanical stability is low, and this mechanical stability is determined by the textile support. So the textile support is responsible for the mechanical ability at the end. And the water vapor permeability is very low, and the water vapor absorption as well, because it's a tight synthetic film which completely stops the diffusion of water molecules. We have also analyzed a PVC coated textile, and we find a similar situation as in the PUR coated textile. If we compare this with Deserto and apple skin, we can see that the values are, in some cases, especially water vapor absorption and water vapor permeability, the values are similar to these of PUR coated textile. The flex resistance is much lower, so this has to be improved to get successfully on the market. And in case of teak leaf, snap pep, and Pinatex, we find very different values. Snap pep is very open in the structure for the vapor, for water vapor, so the permeability is very high. In case of Pinatex, the flex resistance is very high. And in case of teak leaf, we find almost in all cases very low values. And again, the the tensile strength and the tear resistance is determined by the textile support. Regarding kombucha and muskin, we find very high values for the water vapor absorption and water vapor permeability. Especially the absorption is in kombucha very high, the permeability is very low. In this case, muskin, both values are very high, but the mechanical stability and as well the flex resistance are very low. So these materials are not really usable for a final application. In case of cork and wood, we find again that the mechanical stability is determined by the textile support, and the wood structure is very open, of course, because we have these cuttings on top. In the case of cork, it's a hydrophobic material on top, so the water vapor permeability and the water vapor absorption are very low. So I would like to summarize a bit. Leather shows a universal behavior to all of these different parameters: processability, usability, and also the flex resistance. And at the end, leather shows a universal behavior in regard to the processability and the comfort and the aging behavior. If we now mention and discuss which plant tissues could be used, for example, to manufacture a material which is similar to a leather material, which is made from skin, so animal tissue. We can think about that we have a couple of different plant tissues, for example, the leaves, the roots, barks, the fruits, and as well the wood. In case of animal tissue, we have a couple of different tissues which are coming from animals, for example, the skin, the bone, of course, the cardiovascular system, motion, then that means as tissue muscles, for example, or tendons. Then we have organs which are responsible for digestion, perception, the neural system, and the brain, and so on. So a couple of different tissues with specific functions and with specific properties. We are now focusing on the skin and compare the skin as a tissue of the animal with these different plant tissues, which we can take from nature, and to compare them regarding their option and possibility to be used as an alternative. We find as well that the complexity increases of different organisms, for example, from bacteria to fungi to algae to plants and to animals. So the complexity of an animal is much higher than the complexity, for example, of fungi. Tissue, I would say tissue. So we compare these different tissues regarding their biological function. And if we now look on the different biological functions, we have, for example, the physical stability, we have the necessity to have an energy storage, we have transport functions, of course, just look on the blood or the blood system. We have a mechanical protection, for example, we have metabolism and reproduction. We have the temperature regulation, which is responsible to regulate the temperature in the body and also in plants, to cool the plants, the leaves, for example. And we have humidity regulation. And now let us compare these different plant tissues, wood, fruit, leaf, root, and bark, as well as the hyphae coming from the fungi, with the skin. The physical stability is corresponding with the processability. The mechanical protection is reflecting the usability, and the temperature regulation and humidity regulation reflects the comfort. And if we now look on the plant tissues, we can find that the wood is especially responsible for the physical stability. The fruit and the leaves are responsible for the energy storage. The leaves, the roots, the barks, and as well, of course, of fungi, the hyphae, are responsible for transport of nutrients and water. And mechanical protection is taken over from the bark in the case of wood or of trees, for example. And metabolism and reproduction is taken over from the fruit, from the leaf, and in case of the fungi, of the hyphae. And the leaves in plants are especially responsible for the temperature regulation and humidity regulation. If we now compare this with the skin, we can see that especially the function of the physical stability, the mechanical protection of a body, and the temperature regulation and humidity regulation is taken over by the skin. So the skin is not responsible for energy storage, which is not necessary. The skin is not responsible for transport, which is as well not necessary, and also not responsible for metabolism and reproduction. So what could we learn from this short talk? The skin has an impressive physical stability and elasticity. It shows hydrophilic behavior, and the water vapor permeability depends on the top coat. If we have a top coat on the layer, of course, it slows down. And the skin shows modest water tightness and water absorption, skin and leather. So it shows, regarding our final properties, a very universal ability, and it shows universal properties. In case of these pure synthetic coatings, we see a high physical stability, which is especially determined by the support. And we see a high tightness against water and water vapor, which is caused by these synthetic films on top and different layers. So the resistance is very high, the processability is modest, and the comfort is low because the water vapor permeability, water vapor absorption are low. If we now focus on pure plant alternatives, we can see that the physical stability is often low and is determined from the support. Think to the wood and to the cork material. And it's strongly varying, the strongly varying parameters are depending on the material structure. So pure plant materials are up to now interesting, but they have to improve markedly to get a final product which is comparable to the leather. Thank you very much for this attention, and if you have questions, please be free to ask them.
Esses resultados nos trazem conteúdo para a comunicação.
Well, that gives us content for communication and to value leather scientifically. It was a very important study that was broadly disseminated in the sector. We want to thank Dr. Michael for participating in our forum. I'd like to remind you that we are online with the CSCB Forum on Sustainability 2021, done by Brasilia Leather and Apex Brazil, for the participation of national leather in the international market. Our gold sponsors, JBS Leathers, NBN Technology, and Smithson. And our silver sponsors, ATC Brazil, Bookman, Aero America, the Union of Leather Tanning Industry in the state of Mato Grosso, and Units Brazil. Tomorrow, the CSCB Sustainability Forum will begin at 10, with a whole session dedicated to sustainability cases and organizations in our supply chain. It will be invaluable for us to know the practices used on the daily basis by private companies that may inspire business partners in leather, shoes, chemicals, machines, and other actors in our industry. Don't miss our program. Short presentations by different companies like Smithson, Coruvali and Mats, Arezzo, the certification Origem Sustentável, and JBS Leathers. Thank you very much and see you tomorrow.